Group 13. Our topic is the nature of work. Today is dramatically different from work during the early 20th century. I'm Rafi.
I'm Wajid.
I'm Andy.
I'm Tiffany.
They're supporting unions, we're opposing unions. She's going now.
Okay, so let's start with how unions have impacted the 20th century in a positive spotlight. So during the Great Depression in Canada, the economy was in a recession, and many businesses chose to exploit their employees by lowering their wages to minimize their overall business costs. However, with the help of unions, they helped fight for the Fair Labor Standards Act, which was established in 1938, but it's also known now as the Minimum Wage Law. And some businesses supported unions because they thought that high wages would increase productivity and prosperity in the economy. And in order to prevent businesses from exploiting workers, they had to establish a minimum wage to protect employees. Without the minimum wage, workers wouldn't be able to support their families because of the lack of a living wage. In addition, working conditions in the past were horrible, as job security, assistance in the event of illness, injury, or death were almost non-existent. Immigrants were usually the ones that were exploited for cheap labor because many were unable to speak English and were unaware of their rights, so they were forced to work in very unsafe working conditions. Unions led the fight to change this to get the Ontario government to take workplace health and safety seriously by getting them to recognize the issues by passing the Industrial Safety Act. The Industrial Safety Act includes making the health and safety a joint responsibility for both management and workers. But they didn't stop there. Unions also helped to get maternity and parental benefits that didn't exist back then. And new mothers had to choose between quitting their jobs or returning to work quickly, depending on whether or not the family depended on her income. Initially, the federal government only introduced a minimum of 15 weeks of paid maternity leave at 66% of a mother's previous salary. But due to the support of unions, women became eligible to get longer paid maternity with higher levels of benefits for union members. They also guaranteed that women could return to their jobs that they held prior to their maternity leave.
So I'll be talking about how unions have impacted the 20th century workforce, but adversely. 20th century workforce has been shaped by common law and collective bargaining law. Earlier in the century, work law was pursued under common law along with minimal government regulations, which gave freedom of contract to the parties involved, which meant that they could walk away without any legal binding if they did not agree on the terms. Employer and employee relationship was defined as master and servant. This gave a lot of bargaining power to employers, which they would use to exploit workers by giving them low pay, longer working hours, unsafe working conditions without much repercussion. Employees would either exit or voice. Those workers who voiced against the employer's oppression were faced with violent retaliation with the help of state machinery. For example, the Winnipeg General Strike of 1937. In the face of this, for the most part of the 20th century, workers were struggling to increase their bargaining power by having representation of some sort that supports every kind of workers. In the common law system, workers were allowed to form groups but not threaten employers. This changed when the Wagner Act was implemented, that stated employers had to recognize unions and negotiate with them and gave them the right to strike. This was a landmark act in the 20th century that made way for a new work law known as collective bargaining. Unions gave a voice to employees by getting them high pay, better working hours, and better working conditions. However, where they have increased bargaining power of employees, historically unions have restricted benefits to a few, protecting those who are members of the union, even though after the RAND formula, every member in a unionized organization pays a fee to the union. Also, they support more skilled workers than unskilled workers, which defeats the purpose of having a union. Innovation is restricted as well and results in hostile relationship between employers and employees. In the collective bargaining unit, parties do not have the freedom to walk away, so they have to negotiate.
Okay, so let's move to the present to see how the union is doing their work. So what happened in the past that the right to safety at work were established from the Industrial Safety Act? which became the foundation of the Canada Labor Code. And this Canada Labor Code gives the employee 3 rights to the safety at work. And the first right is to refuse unsafe work. The second is to know about hazard in the workplace. And the last one is to participate in health and safety discussions. By doing this, unions hold employers accountable to fulfill their obligations to keep their workers safe. And the next point is through the establishment of maternity and parental benefit in the past, it made the maternity leave more accessible for both men and women. For example, by expanding the minimum of 15 weeks of paid maternity to 18 weeks, union continue to support workers by having employer either provide employee with daycare facility at the workplace or offer the employees available daycare facility in locations that are closer to their workplace. So by doing so, union provide more economic stability and the necessary valuable time to care for their children as well as supporting their growing families. So as we know that in general, US is very similar to Canada. So what happened in US we can expect can happen in Canada too. So according to the statistic of US scholar, due to the decline of US union, there is an increase in both the wage inequality and the gap between the different working classes in society. Technically, there is a research indicate that a positive correlationship of the relationship between unionization and life satisfaction, as union member report that they have higher life satisfaction than non-union members. And we can see that union is not only support employee but also employer in the whole country. For example, with the establishment of the minimum wage and better working conditions, some employees show an increase in satisfaction with their job, which increase in the rate of productivity in the economy, and consequently increase the standard of living of Canada. So the tendency of union is decreasing recently. However, in my opinion, without union, there is no force to balance the power between employer and employees, and there is no one to force employer to look at the mutual interest of both parties, and there is no one to protect employees.
Oh, it's my turn now. I'll be talking about cartels and business and wages in present time. So unions argue that they can raise their members' wages, but few Americans understand the economic theory explaining how they do this. Unions are labor cartels. Cartels work by restricting the supply of what they produce, so the consumer will have to pay higher prices for it. Unions raise the wages of their members both by forcing consumers to pay more for what they buy or do without and by costing some workers their jobs. They have the same harmful effect on the economy as the other cartels. Despite benefiting some workers instead of stock owners, that is why the federal antitrust laws exempt the labor unions. Otherwise, anti-monopoly statutes would also prohibit union activity. Unions' role as a monopoly cartels explains their opposition to trade and competition. A cartel can change higher prices only as long as it remains a monopoly. If consumers can buy elsewhere, a company must cut its prices or go out of business. So in unions in business, economic theory suggests that unions raise the wages of their members at the cost of lower profits and fewer jobs. That lower profits cause businesses to invest less, and the unions have a smaller effect in competitive markets where a union cannot obtain a monopoly. So unions in the workplace, union contract typically give workers group identities instead of treating them as individuals. So unions do not have the resources to monitor each worker's performance and tailor the contract accordingly. Even if they would not want to do so. Unions want employees to view the union not the individual achievements as the source of their economic gains. As a result, unions contract typically base pay and promotion as seniority or detailed union job classifications. So union rarely allow employers to base pay on individuals' performance or promote worker on the basis of individual ability. So union contracts compress wages. This suppress the wages of more productive workers and raise the wages of the less competent. Unions redistributed wealth between workers. Everyone gets the same seniority-based raise regardless of how much or little he contributes, and this reduces wage inequality in ununionized companies, but this increased equality comes at a cost to employers. Often the best workers will not work under union contracts that put a cap on their wages. So unions firms have difficulty attracting and retaining top employers. So we're done, but our conclusion is you guys have to decide, like you guys sitting in the front or maybe in the back. So are you guys supporting unions or against unions? Which side are you guys on? Thank you. See you soon.